Good afternoon. The program will start shortly. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Buenas tardes. My name is Juan Garcia, and I'm the Deputy Director of AJC Welfare Institute for Latino and Latin American Affairs. On behalf of AJC and the U.S.-Mexico Foundation, we welcome you to this conversation with a very well-known guest and an excellent moderator. Today, we'll have Raul Rodriguez as the moderator for the conversation. Raul is the Associate Vice President for International Affairs at Tecnológico de Monterrey. He served as CEO of the North American Development Bank. Raul is a former chairman of the U.S.-Mexico Foundation and is a member of AJC's Latino Jewish Leadership Council. Born in Mexico, he lives in the U.S. and Canada for 28 years. Raul is also a distinguished Project Interchange alumni. We will start the conversation now, and please remember, at the end of the session, we open for Q&A. Please feel free to send your questions to bila@ajc.org. Bila, B-I-L-L-A, @ajc.org. Thank you. Raúl, por favor.
Gracias, Juan. Muy buenos días. Shalom. Thank you for joining us in this conversation on the Mexican American and the Jewish diasporas in the U.S. A pleasure to join Dina and Enrique. They don't need any introduction. We all know them very well, and we'll save some time by not reading any new bios. As we continue to face this crisis and prepare for the post-pandemic world, we believe, the three of us believe strongly that this is the right time to explore how to strengthen affinities between our diasporas, our cooperation, and our respective links to the homelands. Let me read you a few statistics that will provide some context to our conversation. According to the UN, the United States has by far the largest foreign-born population in the world, close to 50 million immigrants, almost 4 times more than Germany, which is the next country on the list. This is 50 times more than Mexico's foreign-born in absolute terms, 20 times more in relative terms. The U.S. diasporas have not only grown, they have dramatically changed in composition over recent years. 50 years ago, 8% of foreign-born came from Mexico. Today, it's close to 30%. The U.S. has become much less European and much more Latin in one generation. 1/3, for example, 1/3 of the population of California and Texas is of Mexican origin. Just to give you a better sense of the demographic tsunami we're experiencing in the States, despite diminishing immigrant flows over the past few years, in 2018, Texas gained almost 9 Hispanic residents for every additional non-Hispanic white resident. There are 60 million Hispanics overall in the States, 37 million of Mexican origin, 11 million of them born in Mexico. By 2050, if trends continue, 1 in every 4 Americans will be Hispanic. Before the end of the century, this will be the largest Hispanic nation in the world. By contrast, the Jewish community in the US and Mexico is very small. Somewhere between 40 and 50,000 Jews live in Mexico, and some 6 million core Jews live in the States. However, to paraphrase David Brooks, their legacy displays the most amazing disproportion, evidenced by their economic power, scholarly achievements, and philanthropy. The US is therefore the preeminent land of diasporas. Jews and Mexicans in particular have different levels of cohesion and assimilation and contrasting forms of connecting with our homelands. But we have in common a tremendous contribution to the vitality of the United States, which we have all witnessed as we confront the pandemic. This is particularly true in the case of migrant and emergency workers today. Dina, our conversation today is based on the links between our two diasporas in the US, Jews and people of Mexican origin. This bond is not exactly a new development. Can you describe the early connecting threads in history between both diasporas to provide some context?
Of course. Thank you, Raul, for being our distinguished moderator today and for your support always. You're an excellent ally of our shared causes, of our transnational links, a believer in both diasporas, the potential for both diasporas working together and achieving much. And also, I would like to thank the US-Mexico Foundation, Enrique Perret, for this opportunity to join together today and explore this very important topic. Indeed, Jewish history in the United States and in Mexico dates back to 1492 with the expulsion of Jews from Spain, which coincidentally, I have to say, took place the same day that Christopher Columbus sailed to the New World. Some Jews in the 16th century sought refuge in the Calvinist Republic of the Netherlands, seeking to escape the Inquisition in both Spain and later on Portugal. A century later, hundreds of their descendants crossed the ocean to settle in the new Dutch colony of Recife in Brazil, where Jewish communal life became possible for the first time in the Jewish world. When Portugal recaptured this colony in 1654, its Jewish refugees escaped once again persecution and the Inquisition, and they spread through the Dutch Caribbean, establishing new Jewish communities, for example, in Curaçao. 23 Jews continued their journey into the remote Dutch port of New Amsterdam, which became later New York, and settled there. This marked the beginning of Jewish communal life in North America, the most successful chapter, as you have mentioned, in the history of the Jewish diaspora. Regarding the Jewish presence in New Spain, Jews who had converted to Christianity but continued practicing their Judaism in secret, known, as many of you know, as marranos or crypto Jews, arrived with the conquistadores. They settled first in the capital and then migrated to many current US southern states, once part of northern Mexico, to flee also the Inquisition, among them the famous Carvajal family. In the past decades, we have seen a rebirth of Jewish identity in thousands of Mexicans and Mexican Americans who claim that they descend from those crypto Jews and who preserve Jewish traditions that were handed down without any explanation from generation to generation. Indeed, as a gesture of reconciliation after 500 years and recognizing Judaism as an integral part of its national identity, Spain in 2015 passed a law to grant Jewish Sephardic descendants Spanish citizenship. Around 135,000 Jews throughout the world have applied and have been granted citizenship. Portugal also followed Spain's example. So our communities have indeed shared spaces in time, in history and geography, dating back many centuries and spanning north and south, east and west.
Thank you, Dina. Enrique, Dina, I don't know if you visited the museum, the Jewish History Museum in Philadelphia, but there's an exhibit there and it's labeled First Families. And it goes back to the late 17th century. As you say, Dina, these were Jews that were coming in from Lisbon and Madrid and London and Recife, and establishing in New Amsterdam and Newport. And the names, there's thumbnail portraits there in that exhibit. And it's very impressive. It's about, I don't know, 20, 25 names. And it's Jacob Rodriguez de Rivera, Isaac Mendez, Luis Moses Gomez, Aaron Lopez. You feel like you're in Mexico City, you know. And the same is true when you're having lunch in Monterrey. It's almost like you're in the Mahane Yehuda market in Jerusalem with the carne asada and the cabrito and the semitas and the capriotada and the tortilla de harina. So the connections are very much there, as you say, Dina. So Enrique, there are obvious contrasts in the US between the Mexican and the Jewish diasporas in terms of our culture, in terms of our demographics, our economic and political clout. But where do you see the connection today, building on what Dina just said, the tangible reasons for this kind of empathy and cooperation that we're trying to build and that are epitomized by your two organizations.
Thank you, Raul, and thank you, Dina, for inviting us here. I think the diaspora topic is a very passionate topic for us. And yes, Raul, I mean, you mentioned a lot of differences or contrast between one diaspora and the other diaspora. Obviously, the demographics, you mentioned 6 million again, 34 million Mexicans living in the US right now. Economics, even regions and cities. I mean, many things that differentiate the diaspora, the Jewish diaspora from the Mexican diaspora here. But I think, and nowadays, the common goals or the common challenges are pretty same that in the past, and we need to look forward to achieve those goals. And I think one of those goals is the lack of knowledge. And I think that's the root of many things, right? The lack of knowledge, the lack of information, the lack of data, the lack of communications with policymakers, with governors, with, I mean, legislators, that maybe even academia, universities, students that don't understand different things because we don't communicate well or because the information is not there. And that lack of knowledge drives to sometimes to fear, sometimes to disparity, sometimes to bad rhetoric, sometimes to a very polarized state, cities, and countries. And at the end, everything drives to intolerance, right? And intolerance is what our diaspora suffered the most in the past. At least on the Mexican side, this lack of knowledge, this intolerance to many Hispanics, many Mexicans, some of them undocumented, but most of them legally in this country, it's very hard to take. So I think those common goals, that common ground is what we bring. It's what brings different communities, in this case, the Jewish community and the Mexican community. But for Mexicans, when you talk about Hispanics, you talk about Mexicans, but also people from Nicaragua or El Salvador or Honduras. And the goal is the same, right? It's to live more freely, to have different things on healthcare, on the economy, to be recognized as value to the society in different things, to participate in the social life of a country, to participate on the civil society of a country. And I think that's the common and highest goal for our two communities. And I think there are not just common goals, but I think there are common grounds in which we can work together, right? I mean, this is an example, the AJC and the US-Mexico Foundation, but we can find many other places, many other grounds in universities or think tanks or research centers in which these two diasporas are working together to find solutions to those specific goals. Maybe we are different, maybe, I mean, everything, again, demographics and history, cultural stuff, but at the end, here in a different country, that is US, from the origin, the goal or the challenges are the same. And from our perspective, the Mexican diaspora needs a lot to learn from the Jewish diaspora. I mean, and in one word, institutionality, right? The Jewish diaspora creates institutions. You talk already about a museum, right? We are still, I mean, the Hispanics and the Mexican are still fighting for those spaces. And you have 40 years or 30 years or 20 years with those institutions already. The participation of the community in the social life it's another huge difference. The Mexicans, because history and how they arrived to the US, at the beginning, they didn't participate in the social life. There were I mean, we can see with the Spanish, with the language. At the beginning, they were afraid to speak Spanish, right? Nowadays, it's changing a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But I think those common grounds, challenges, goals, I think we need to take those into consideration to work together, Raul.
And connecting your comments, I'd say that it's a lack of knowledge of the past too. Again,
Sure.
if we connect the dots in terms of how these two diasporas have a sort of confluence in the past. I mean, how many Mexicans know about the sagas of Luis de Carvajal and Diego de Montemayor in the foundational era in Monterrey, for example? You know, how many of us have read Seymour Liebman and your friend Dina, and all the wealth that these authors bring in terms of that past, which, as I mentioned, it underscores the confluence of both diasporas. Dina, let me build on all this, asking you for a personal comment, not as the director of the Belfer Institute, but as a Mexican-American Jew. You participate in both diasporas as well as being an American. Tell us about your experience being part and dealing with both diasporas. Where do you see the opportunities for cooperation, the hurdles, knowing that we play an important part not only in terms of what happens in the States, but also between US, Latin America, Israel, Spain, etc.
Of course, of course. Well, I have to say that it's really been a privilege to be part of both diasporas. You know, I always say I was a Mexican-American even when I was in Mexico because my father was an American citizen. So, you know, I really was brought up in a transnational, global type of environment. You know, that gave me really the basis, I think, to be what I've been for the last, you know, for my whole life, but especially professionally, having worked for the last 35 years, building bridges between communities, nations, religions, ethnic groups, and also being a translator. You know, I'm a translator and a bridge builder, you know, and I think that that's a very important role that I play, especially because, as Enrique said, and as you said, there's a lot of misconceptions about both communities. And it's very important that I'm, you know, that I'm an insider in both diasporas, you know, that I have this credibility and that I have that cultural affinity. And I can, you know, and I can translate what's going on in my other diaspora, you know, and try to find those spaces for cooperation. I can say that there's been some important challenges. Some important challenges remain that I've seen throughout all these years. Number one, of course, we spoke about the demographics. You know, Jews have never been about numbers. We're 6 million, you know, we're 15 million around the world, and we've always punched above our weight, you know, everywhere, you know, whether it be Mexico, there's 40,000 Jews, or in Guatemala, where there's 1,000 Jews, or elsewhere. Numbers have not really been, I would say, an obstacle. But what has happened when you have 37 million Mexicans and 6 million Jews is that the sense of urgency of building, of coalition building, is not the same. For Jews, you know, for us, it's a matter of survival. It's important to build coalitions with others in American society in order to advance common agenda. That's the way this society works and how our democratic system works. And Mexican Americans, because of the numbers, because also, as Enrique said, it's a very young diaspora. The concept of diaspora is what, 50 years, 60 years, you know, even though Mexicans have been here for many, many centuries, you know, and the famous, you know, I didn't cross the border crossed me, but they haven't had that identity as diaspora. And Jews have had thousands of years of identity as diasporas. So for us, you know, building institutions has been, and finding the way to integrate while at the same time retaining our own identity is very natural. It's part of our DNA. At the same time, you know, this idea of the ancestral homeland, Israel, you know, which became a reality in 1948. Also, you know, for us, this yearning for the ancestral homeland, whatever, when Israel became to fruition, and even before, you know, it was very natural for us to support it. And to be part of its establishment and its growth. I think that with Mexico, you know, I'm thinking now in terms of our transnational links, you know, not only, you know, becoming American citizens and creating this strong Mexican-American community, but also, you know, being a constructive actor in strengthening bilateral ties between Mexico and the United States. Most Mexican Americans don't have that, that awareness or even the will to act as a connector. So, you know, and for us, foreign policy, for American Jews, foreign policy is a very central issue. So what we see, the opportunities that exist is that, you know, because of our experience, if we all bring to the table what we have, Mexican Americans bring their numbers, their their growing empowerment, economic and political empowerment. Jews bring their experience to the table, institution building and philanthropic experience, etc. We can build something quite powerful. And you know, that's what we do in our Belfer Institute, that's what we do at AJC.
Let me piggyback on that, Dina, if I may. Talk about the institutional framework, both of you. Enrique, why don't you start with this description of the U.S.-Mexico Foundation, your role in all this?
Thank you, Raul. And well, basically, the U.S.-Mexico Foundation, it's a facilitator, it's an enabler. We're working a lot on public diplomacy, but our main goal, when you take into consideration that the relationship between Mexico and the U.S. is the most complex relationship between two countries, because you have security, you have migration, you have trade, you have I mean, the diaspora, for sure, it's one of this big, for me it's an asset, right? But it's a topic, super complex, big border, right? 1954 miles of border, many cross-border bridges. When you take that into consideration, what the U.S.-Mexico Foundation is bringing to the table is how to create, how to energize this institutional relationship, right? How can we manage in the best possible way the relationship between universities? How can you manage in the best possible way the relationship with the business sector from US and from Mexico? And in every chapter, the really important thing is that diaspora is in everything. It's a very specific asset that can facilitate this work between Mexico and the US in everything, in business, in the economy, in trade, on migration, in everything, in every industry. The diaspora is participating now in US. And because the border between Mexico and US is so big, obviously the diaspora the Mexican diaspora is now participating also back in the Mexican economy more and more and more, not just through remittances that are $37 billion, is the largest amount of money that arrives into Mexico on a yearly basis, more than foreign direct investment, more than stock capital, more than oil and gas. Now the remittances is the highest number. So that's the role of the U.S.-Mexico Foundation, Raul, how to connect, how to facilitate this dialogue, how to create channels in where there is no channel, right, of communications right now. Obviously, the government plays a big role, but the civil society, the academy, the universities, the think tanks needs to play a bigger role, and that's what we're trying to do. Connect on the public diplomacy to activate people not active in the relationship. How can you active someone in the relationship between the Jewish community and U.S.? Well, let's take people from the U.S. to Israel.
Yeah.
Let's take people and to know the industry, to know our culture. And once they are there, they get active. And that's the way to go. And that's what we are also doing in the U.S.-Mexico Foundation, learning from the experts, learning from the AJC and other communities. I mean, the Spanish community is doing a tremendous job there. Asian communities like Singapore, Japan is doing a very good job there. India is doing a tremendous job with a huge diaspora. And you need to learn from others, right?
You can go down the list, Ireland, and you know, and
yeah.
the list goes on and on. Puerto Rico, even though you know they're cousins, I mean they do a fantastic job in terms of the presence in the U.S. in general. Let me follow up on that, Enrique. In tandem with the Woodrow Wilson Center's Mexico Institute, just yesterday you presented a very important report. And this has to do with a convening that you had earlier this year, right before the shutdown in San Antonio, of former ambassadors from the U.S. to Mexico and from Mexico to the U.S. I believe it's an unprecedented event. You correct me if I'm wrong. But in any event, I think it's extremely timely, it's very relevant, and it truly fits the needs in the context of the complexity that you described of bilateral agenda. Can you tell us about this, please?
Yeah, for sure. Basically, Raul, there are 18 former ambassadors in the relationship, from Julian Nava from California, first Hispanic Mexican-American ambassador from the U.S. to Mexico, to Jerónimo Gutiérrez, the last ambassador that we had with Enrique Peña Nieto. So 18, we invite all of them. And it's a very interesting story because it's easy to think, Raul, that these former ambassadors get together once in a while to discuss topics. I mean, it's the usual thing. I mean, you can think on that. But when we search a little bit, we find that I mean, they never did, right? So we start, calling them, asking if they're willing to travel to San Antonio to meet with their peers, to meet with their colleagues. And everyone said, yes, let's do it, right? So we bring together 12 former ambassadors, 6 from US, 6 from Mexico. And we discuss during 2 days, 4 different issues: security, migration, rule of law and security, and the soft power. We call it the soft power, but it's all about the diaspora. It's all about what is the Mexican Americans doing in the U.S. from movies to literature, gastronomy, a lot of things, right? And how this soft power can, help in the relationship. And 2 weeks ago, we finalized the report of those recommendations. Obviously, the recommendations goes primary to the governments, but those are also recommendations from people that spend a lot of time in the relationship, a lot of time creating value and policy and public policy. So these recommendations are also for civil society and for business leaders, how to act now in the pandemic. Once that struck us in the past is that with the COVID-19, it was pretty clear that it wasn't a structure between Mexico and US to react to the supply chain, for example. US released a list of essential industries and non-essential, and Mexico released a total different list of industries on the essential list, and it didn't fit, right? Even though we have industries like the automotive industry and aerospace. So again, a lot to do on that institutional architecture. And that was the main, I think, goal from convocation. That is the name for this event and report.
And it's a great report, and it's available on your website as well as the Woodrow Wilson Center, right?
Exactly.
And by the way, Ambassador Bárcena, Ambassador Andal were there yesterday, in addition to the former ambassadors who represented the group from back in January.
Exactly. Great comments yesterday. Absolutely. And I think we need to do that more often.
Well, I hear that the idea is doing it at least once a year, so I'm all for that. I think in addition to that, the setting was perfect because you were at Roger and Mary Wallace's ranch close to San Antonio, and they are the example of connectors, you know, as both of you are. They have spent their lives connecting leaders from both sides of the border, and to great avail. So couldn't find a better place to do it.
Exactly. No, it's true. Roger is an amazing connector between U.S. and Mexico, and he's a co-sponsor of this event, and we're gonna try to energize the relationship through these kind of events.
Fantastic. Dina, let's continue with the institutional framework. Tell us about the AJC, the Belfer Institute, your baby, the Latino Jewish Leadership Council. What kind of role do you play vis-a-vis the diasporas? Israel as a central topic. How do you advocate for the interests of Israel so effectively?
Of course. Well, AJC is, as you know, the preeminent global Jewish advocacy organization in the world. We are known as the State Department of the Jewish people. That's what Shimon Peres called us, former Prime Minister of Israel. It was founded in 1906, and its mission is to promote democratic values and civil and human rights for Jews and other minorities in the United States and everywhere, and to secure Israel's place in the community of nations. We have 24 offices. 2 were opened just recently in honor of George Floyd, one in Minneapolis, the other one in Kentucky. And we have 11 offices around the world. We also have thematic institutes, just like our Belfer Institute, which is unique in the Jewish world. There's no other institute like ours. It's the only one that works 24/7 to build coalitions between Latinos and Jews in the United States, and then to foster strong ties among the United States, Latin America, Spain, and Portugal. And what we try to do is really bring all the threads together of the Latino universe writ large. And I wanted to start by bringing to your attention, I know that you know about it, but I'm sure that many people in the audience don't know about this really, really special program that we held several years ago. It was during our global forum, which is AJC's annual conference. We do it in Washington. We bring thousands of Jewish leaders from around the world and other opinion leaders. And we always try to address trends and developments in the world and how that's impacting Jewish communities and the Jewish world in general. And it was 2016 during the presidential elections, and the rhetoric against Mexicans was at its peak. And we were extremely concerned about that because, as you know, relations with Mexico, with its Mexican diaspora, has been going on for many, many years. We've traveled to Mexico together, Mexican-American leaders and AJC leaders, to connect with interlocutors there, with the Mexican Jewish community. And really, we see Mexico as a strategic partner for the United States and for Israel. And therefore, we, together with the Mexican embassy here and with the Foreign Ministry of Mexico, we brought the 50 consul generals of Mexico to our global forum and they were joined by 40 Mexican-American leaders from all over the country. They were joined by the Mexican-American, about 30 leaders of the Mexican Jewish community and by the foreign minister. And what we wanted to convey loudly and clearly is that we would not stand by when our Mexican partners were being, mistreated, that we didn't accept that as part of our American society, and that we would stand by their side. So that was a very powerful expression of solidarity and of shared goals. We wanted to convey that very clearly. So this is the type of work that our institute does. Our institute is always trying to find the spaces for collaboration. We were saying that, Enrique was saying that, Mexican Americans and American Jews, have a lot of goals in common, but there's not enough interaction. What we try to do with our institute is find those spaces to bring both communities together. And there are topics that are, of course, very high on our shared agenda, whether it be the topic of immigration. AJC has been, very, very vocal on the topic of immigration reform, hate crimes, which unfortunately continue. As you know, anti-Semitism has also been growing by leaps and bounds. And we speak, of course, we try to fight anti-Semitism, hopefully together with our partners. And we also raise our voice for any type of hatred and foreign policy. And wherever we can help to strengthen bilateral ties between Mexico and trilateral ties between Mexico, Israel, and the United States, we will continue doing so.
You and I co-authored a few years back, 3 years ago, an editorial on the Hill regarding the DACA Dreamers. And again, I think it represents a part of your struggle in terms of making a dent on immigration policy and practices. It's not easy. I mean, I was just reading Rafael Medoff's new book on the extremely complicated situation the refugees faced during World War II in the US with the Roosevelt administration, and the clash between Rabbi Wise and Peter Bergson and all that. It's never easy. It's same thing in Mexico. Daniela Glazer has this fantastic book on with a similar picture regarding the Jewish experience as immigrants in Mexico. Not easy. So what organizations like yours do, and the Jewish Agency, needless to say, is crucial. I mean, that is one of the angles that epitomizes the need for an institutional framework.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yes, well, the whole issue of a welcoming society, which has been so important for the Jewish community and for other minorities. I mean, the fact that this society has been enriched and continues to be enriched by waves of immigrants, that's something that for us, we want that to continue to be the narrative. And we have been advocating for immigration reform. Unfortunately, political times have not allowed for this type of optics to continue, but we believe that that most Americans are open, and are positive on immigrants and on keeping the doors open, of course in an orderly way, etc. And that's why you need immigration reform. But this will be probably a very important topic in the months and years to come. It will continue to end, and hopefully, finally, there will be some sort of bipartisan agreement on that front.
One more item in terms of what you do, Dina, and Enrique mentioned this, the connection between young Jewish leaders and Israel, the connection between young leaders from other areas of life in the US and Israel. That is so crucial. What you do in Project Interchange and Birthright Israel and other programs is, I think, it sets the standard in terms of what diaspora organizations should be doing today. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Sure, of course. Well, you're a distinguished alum, as was said, of Project Interchange. Project Interchange is an institute of AJC that for 30 years has been taking opinion leaders, not only young. We don't discriminate against, all all ages.
I'm a testament to that.
Yeah, we take opinion leaders to Israel from 110 countries. We've taken 7,000 leaders of every sort, religious leaders, academic leaders, civil society leaders, parliamentarians, journalists, etc. And the idea is to witness firsthand what Israel is all about, you know, and speak to interlocutors there, understand the complexity of Israeli society, also the dynamics of its environment, you know, speak to Palestinian leaders as well, and you know, come back with not a very unclear idea, but that's the idea. The idea is to understand that there's no easy answers. It cannot, the situation cannot be reduced to black and white. You know, and that's a very important issue for us. And thankfully, our alumni, who, you know, we continue very much in communication with after they come back, you know, become outspoken on these topics, become allies, you know, and are able to really clarify, you know, what's going on in Israel and in the Middle East in a much more enlightened, I would say, in a much more informed way than before. So that's very important for us. And of course, going to Israel and interacting with its people, it already makes a very important connection. That human connection cannot be underestimated. It's very, very important. Birthright Israel is not an AJC project, but it's a very important project of the Jewish community in the United States and now really globally. It was founded many years ago and by some important philanthropists who have given millions and millions of dollars to allow young Jews who have never been to Israel to experience Israel at least once. And because they feel that it's important that they should see firsthand, you know, what Israel is all about, and also to strengthen their Jewish identity and their Jewish connection to Israel. And, you know, the results have been really astounding. People who had never, and I know that, you know, the US-Mexico Foundation does something similar. Enrique spoke about it, of bringing young Mexican-Americans, or not young, Mexican-American leaders to Mexico to experience, you know, second generation, third generation, to experience what Mexico is all about and understand what Mexican society means. And, you know, it's really an incredible initiative that is continues to bear fruits.
I've been to Israel, I don't know, 5 or 6 times, and the first one was with Project Interchange, and you know, it stands out in my mind in terms of my visits, among other things, because, as you say, it provides clarity, context, in a situation that's not easy to understand. Needless to say, it's extremely complex, and one tends to simplify, and that doesn't help. So you provide that clarity in that context, and that's you know, tremendous contribution, to the extent that you helped us visit Ramallah with the Palestinian leadership and left us alone there with them, you know, have a dialogue on your own. And that's not done by other diasporas, I dare say. You know, take us to understand the other side. It was a wonderful experience, and I continue to thank you for that, and I'm an enthusiastic alum because of that. And as Enrique was saying, I think the US-Mexico Foundation is building on a tradition that was relatively there maybe 30 years ago with Roger Diaz de Cosillo and other people who were connecting leaders from the Mexican-American community with their roots in Mexico. And it disappeared for 30 years, and now you picked it up again, right?
Exactly, Raul, is what we're doing through programs like the US-Mexico 360 program, in which we take policymakers from US, a lot of them Mexican Americans, to go back to Mexico to understand better, to see firsthand, I mean, from a supply chain, a facility, talk with people in Mexico, to eat in a good restaurant and tacos in the street, and I mean, to live and comprehend Mexico through their people, right? It's incredible. It's incredible, but you can ask people here in the U.S. and they don't know Mexico. I mean, probably they went to Cancun once, or they went to Los Cabos, and it's very different, right? So we're doing that kind of programs. We took 120 policymakers last year. In the past, we brought also a lot of dreamers. You mentioned dreamers, Raul, and I think you was the president of the U.S.-Mexico Foundation when you created this Dreamers Without Borders program, in which we took hundreds of dreamers, and along with the Mexican Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we took them to Mexico City, and then 2 or 3 weeks in their city of origin to know their relatives. These are kids or young people that leave Mexico at a very early age, 2, 3, 4 years, and they spend the whole life in the US. I mean, you know, this DACA program. And for me, Raul, that is specific group of Mexicans and Mexican Americans now, even though they don't have the citizenship yet, it's an amazing asset for both countries, Mexico and the US. 20,000 of those, Raul, from this 600,000 group of Mexicans in the DACA program, 20,000 of them are teachers in US. 27,000 of them are people working on the healthcare, right, industry. So they are adding tremendous value to the US society. But also we in Mexico, we need to see them as part of our diaspora, obviously, and a tremendous connectors with the US society. Mm-hmm. They will be entrepreneurs. They are right now entrepreneurs, leaders.
They should be ambassadors. Ambassadors. They should be
ambassadors. Yeah. So that's why for obvious reasons, we stopped that program, because they cannot travel to Mexico right now under the restrictions of the DACA program. Hopefully that will change in the coming weeks or months, and we're gonna reestablish that program to bring those dreamers, people living in US still, to know Mexico better. And not just culturally speaking, they need to know the economy of Mexico. They need to know, I mean, the people, the universities. If they want to return to Mexico to study a master's degree, let's do it, right? It's that bridge that we need to create. So we are following those steps. Dina mentioned 7,000 Jewish people going, but it's 30 years. We have 2 years, and we're taking 120. So Dina mentioned millions and millions of dollars on philanthropy and sponsors behind those initiatives. We need to also to talk with more business leaders back in Mexico, and the business leaders from the Mexican Americans here in the US, to invest on that. For me, it's the best investment a country can do.
And you need an advocacy organization of Mexican American leaders here as well. As AJC, you need an AJC of Mexican, of Mexican Americans advocating for the bilateral relationship, right? Sure. Yeah.
And I mean, just for the audience to understand the limits for a 501c3.
We're also 501c3. We're 501c3, but we're advocate. We're an advocate.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Enrique, Dina has a 114-year advantage on you.
Yeah, exactly.
On the side of AJC.
I will not discuss that.
On the side of AJC. Don't feel too much pressure here, just a little. I have a couple of questions from the audience. And again, if you want to send any more, it's bila@ajc.com. B as in Benjamin.
Org.
Org, I'm sorry. Bila is B as in Benjamin, ILLA @ajc.org. One of the questions has to do with what you just discussed, which is this interchange of leaders. But the other one has to do with something we discussed a few minutes ago, and Enrique, you underscore that. And that is the relative lack of narrative on the Hispanic side of things, which I think is crucial. I mentioned the museum in Philadelphia, which is, by the way, undergoing financial trouble because of the pandemic. Hopefully it'll come out because it's a wonderful museum. But you have a presence, an institutional presence, a physical presence, brick and mortar in Washington, in New York, in Chicago, and Pittsburgh, and Dallas, Phoenix, Tucson, Milwaukee, I can go on, of the Jewish legacy, of the contributions. What do we do on the Hispanic side? What do we do on the Mexican American side to approach that level of exposure? How can we make progress? Where would you start, Enrique?
Listen, Raul, I think most of those institutions and monuments, buildings, philanthropy institutions, organizations, NGOs are, I mean, behind those institutions are leaders, right? Are the leadership of the community. And I do believe on the Hispanic community, there is a lot of leadership. The only thing is that, and growing, Raul, and I can bet that the new generation, second generation, third generation of the Mexican Americans will do an amazing job to create institutions, to participate in the social life again, to participate in different industry, creating companies. I mean, right now, the Hispanics are the ones creating more companies in the US, right? I think double than any other community. And that will change. But the reason why it's, how I see the Jewish community and diaspora, they always work as a unit, right? Maybe because, as Dina said, because survival, right? I mean, they're cheap of survival. And in the Hispanic community, in the Mexican American, maybe because regionalization and many other needs, they didn't work as a unit at the beginning. But I think more and more they are working, or we are working, because now I am now part of the diaspora. I have 6 years living here in the US, so I am part of the Mexican diaspora now. I think we're working more as a unit more than ever. And you can see, I mean, we can describe a lot of stories here of entrepreneurs, very successful entrepreneurs. I mean, we can talk about Guillermo del Toro and Alejandro González Iñárritu, and we can talk about Patty Hinich, that is also Jewish Mexican American, winning for 3 years in a row the James Beard Award as the best gastronomy show in the US. And you can talk about a lot of people, right? This writer Luiselli, many, but it's one is communication, and the second is, or both in the same level, to work as a unit and to communicate. And
yeah, and it's
return to the lack.
It's not the monuments, it's not the brick and mortar, it's the ability to face defamation and polarization that's out there, and it's going to get worse.
Well, that's why I was saying, I'm sorry, but that's why I was saying that you need an organization. You know, right. I know we work very closely with a lot of the Latino communities. Yeah. And I know that, you know, it is a fact that, you know, with 60 million plus, it's very difficult to have, you know, a vertical type of, but Jews don't either. That idea that we work as a unit, we're very diverse, very diverse. Yeah. Yeah. We might come together in certain moments, you know, but in general, you know, we have our own institutional frameworks, mandates, etc. But I do think that, you know, it would be very important, and in two areas that I see that Mexican Americans and Latinos would benefit a lot. One would be having an organization that is focused on foreign policy, and I insist on that because there's not one Latino organization in the United States that is focused on foreign policy, which is very interesting when you have these organic ties of so many with their countries of origin. And they could be, especially now with everything that's going on in Latin America, I think it would be quite important, you know, to act as this ambassador, as I was saying, you know, as these voices. And the other one is also when there's this type of attacks, you know, against Mexicans or Latinos or whatever, and you don't see any type of consequence. I mean, the truth is that you don't see that type of, you know, strong strategy to counteract the voices. And so that is, I think that's a pending assignment where me now taking, you know, as a Mexican American and as a Latina, you know, and maybe having the benefit of working in a Jewish organization, it would be interesting. It would be, I feel, you know, compelled to be of support in helping create something like that.
Fantastic.
You're right, Dina. Last week we saw the announcement. I think it was the Congress, and now needs to
about
go
the
to
Latino
Senate,
Museum.
about the
Yes.
Latino Museum, and
Yes.
I think behind that there is a big effort of advocacy, right? I mean, at the end, many years, but it still is. It's very small. It needs to grow, and you're totally right. Next Monday, the 3rd of August, it will be the 1 year of the this massacre in El Paso against Mexicans, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you were talking about no consequences, Dina, and we forgot a lot. I mean, we forget very easily what is happening, but Raul, you were mentioning this fear, this rhetoric, this polarization, and it's growing. Unfortunately, it's growing and growing, and we will have a super big challenge in front of us in this aspect.
That's why I think that these coalitions that we're trying, you know, that we're trying to strengthen, because the coalition already exists between Mexican Americans and American Jews and others, is very important. You know, we stand together, fighting against and pushing against hate, very important. And to ensure that this society keeps on being inclusive and accepting and open and democratic. And that's, you know, that's as minorities, you know, we're called upon to do that as an American citizens.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you for a 1-minute comment to close the conversation, and hopefully it'll be one of silver linings. Where do you see your diasporas, your respective diasporas, in 10 years? Your place in American society, your role vis-a-vis the homelands, the connections between both, perhaps a common agenda, joint advocacy. 1 minute each. Dina?
Yes, well, I believe that the Jewish community in the United States will continue to punch above its weight. I think it will continue, of course, enriching the fabric of US life in every aspect. And I already see new generations at the forefront of societal change, building a more equitable, inclusive, and prosperous country for all. I hope that links to Israel will be strengthened and not take it for granted, both within the community and outside the community. We hope that the United States will continue to be the indispensable global leader and understand Israel's role as essential in promoting its values and interests in the Middle East. Anti-Semitism and anti-Mexican rhetoric needs to be addressed, as I said, and I hope that we can come together even in a more, in a stronger way, in a more effective way, and make people understand that this is not our problem. It's an American problem. It's a societal problem. And I understand that millennials, you know, find it very easy to connect and natural with different groups. But I would like to say that it's very important that we make a deliberate effort, as I said, to create this spaces for engagement, whether it be in foreign policy, fighting hate speech, the narrative of the United States as a welcoming country to immigrants, and relations with Mexico and Israel as central and strategic.
Thank you, Dina. Enrique?
Raul, we have a program called the Mexican American Leadership Initiative, and that's because we believe that the new generation of Mexican Americans will guide us to a much more dynamic relationship between Mexico and the US. They will be the leaders in this relationship. The Sean Salas, the James Gutierrez, the Bismarck Lepe, people from California, from Texas, from New York, from Illinois, they will, all the DACA members, all the dreamers, I think in 10 years, Raul, will be so proud of this generation. They are super resilient. I think they're the most resilient people I ever met. They arrive with nothing. They are creating. They are very well educated, and I think we need to invest on that community, and that's what we're doing. And I think this pandemic, this COVID-19, will energize them to be better, and to, again, in 10 years, we're going to be very, very proud of that.
Thank you both, Dina and Enrique. We have quite a number of questions that unfortunately we had no time to address, having to do with the religious divide and the role of Nostra Aetate, which we celebrated the 50th anniversary a few years back in Mexico City, thanks to you, Dina. Having to do with connections with the second and third generation of Hispanics, and other matters that hopefully will lead to another conversation soon. I hope we can convene another one. In the meantime, I think I speak both on behalf of Dina and Enrique. We will continue to strive, both at the Belfer Institute and at the U.S.-Mexico Foundation, to continue finding ways to become binding forces in our communities, and to jointly increase what we've discussed several times at AJC meetings, that level of mensch and chutzpah, of that elusive blend of integrity and audacity that we will all need as we address a new post-pandemic world. A big thank you,
Raul,
to your audience. A big thank you to Dina and Enrique. Stay healthy, call Tuv, and we go back to you, Juan.
Thank you, Raul. Thank you, Dina. Thank you, Enrique, for this fascinating conversation and for addressing so many of the critical issues nowadays in American society. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us, and we hope to see you soon in any of our upcoming events. Please visit the US-Mexico Foundation website and ajc.org for more information. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Muchas gracias y buenas tardes.